I hope you've had a chance to get some refreshments. If you are just dying for a cookie or some coffee or punch or something during Jim's presentation, you can just slip away quietly. No one will even notice. We're looking forward to a great time this evening. We're very fortunate and pleased to have Jim Singleton with us. Jim has been a leader of the evangelical movement within the PC USA for a number of years. He served churches up in Spokane, down in Austin, Texas, and most recently, in fact, this coming Sunday is his last Sunday, at First Presbyterian Church in Colorado Springs, where he served the last 7 years as the senior pastor. He is going to be in transition on his way to become a professor of practical theology at Gordon Conwell Seminary in Massachusetts. You like it? And so we were able to snag Jim to come to speak to us. Jim is presently serving, one of the hats he wears is as the president of the Fellowship of Presbyterians. And he'll, I'm sure, share more about what that all entails. But part of what happened with the Fellowship of Presbyterians was the spin-off of this new denomination that is known as ECO. Jim is the principal architect of that new denomination, so we couldn't have anyone better to speak to us about ECO and to be able to field questions. So Jim has a presentation to make tonight, and then we'll have time for questions, discussion together. Let me pray for us, get us kicked off, and then we'll invite Jim to come lead us. Gracious Lord, we stand always in need of your grace, and you have promised that your grace will always undergird our lives as we keep our focus upon Jesus. And so, Father, tonight we pray that you will speak to us in ways that
Well, it is great to be with you on this Tuesday night. The sun is going to, I've persuaded it to keep some of you awake, so it's there by design. So just squint and get your sunglasses on. And I do affirm what Mateen just said. If you are getting bored at any moment, a cookie will help. So just get up, go get one, and I'm not, see, there's one right there, already going to get a cookie. I like that spirit. I might go get one myself, because I may get bored with myself. I feel like I could be in no better place, because I am a native of Oklahoma City, and so I am home. And it just, Mateen said, could you come? Yes, when? I'm ready always to go to Oklahoma City. My father was the pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, 50th and May, between 1951 and 1969. Then we moved to Arkansas, and then he came back here to retire. His name was Martin Singleton, and so this just feels like home. I went to Mayfair Elementary School and Taft Junior High, and my sisters both went to Northwest Classen, and I would have, and one of my sisters came out here to college for a period of time, so I knew where Edmond was, and and Edmond is closer to Oklahoma City than it used to be. It used to feel like it was way out there, and it never really today. I thought, oh, these are all merged together. So all is good. I'm here to try to talk to you about those things around which you as a congregation are discerning. And I want to be presenting some material to you so that you can think it through, but I know that there are going to be many questions that will emerge in your mind, and I will be happy to answer many of those that you would want to ask tonight, and then there may be questions that will just linger for days, and then you can ask Mateen those to solve. I think that's going to impact the decision that you make. Now, there are lots of dynamics that come from any speaker from the outside because I don't know everything you've already heard. You had a town meeting on this just Sunday, I understand. And so, knowing that my colleague Paul Detterman has also been out and spoken at least to some of you in May, that reminds me of the great story from Presbyterian history. Some of you may have heard the name Robert Speer, because the Speer Library at Princeton Seminary is named in his honor. And Robert Speer was this Secretary of Foreign Missions for about 40 years in the Presbyterian Church. He was a towering figure that guided Presbyterians into unprecedented mission connections. But in those days, the missions department had to go around and raise their own money. There was no sense of unified budget in those days. So the missions department had to go church by church by church and raise money. And so he would go out when he was making whistle-stop tours. He would go to one place on a train, stop at lunch, give a talk, get on the train again, go to another place that evening. And he would usually go with somebody from his board. The person he took most often was named Tommy Brown. So as they spoke, every single time Speer spoke, noon and night, noon and night, noon and night, because of his mind, he always did a different talk. Never did the same one twice, exposited a different passage. Brilliant man. Tommy Brown, devoted layperson, felt the cause of missions acutely in his heart. Every time he spoke, he gave the same message. So usually Tommy Brown would go first, and then Speer would speak second, and Tommy Brown gave the same talk, and Robert would give different ones. So on about the third day out in the evening, Robert Speer, who had a perfect auditory memory, meaning he could hear a talk, and he could repeat that talk. He had now heard Tommy Brown's talk 5 times. And he said, "Tommy, what would you think if I went first tonight?" Tommy said, "Oh, that's fine, go right ahead." So Robert Speer got up that night, and in this particular church, I think it was in Indiana, he ended up giving Tommy Brown's talk word for word. And then he went over to a chair, and he sat down, and he just smiled, and then they introduced Tommy Brown. And Tommy Brown got up to speak, and he, without missing a beat, gave an entirely different talk. And he didn't even look at Robert Speer. They were rooming together that night, and he said, Robert was just sitting there thinking that. How did he not comment on that? And so he said, "All right, Tommy, what did you think of my talk tonight?" And Tommy said, "You know, Robert, that's the best one you have ever given me. I've ever heard." And then he said, "But I was wondering what the people thought, because you see, I was out here 3 weeks ago and I gave that talk myself." So I have a little of that nervousness tonight, knowing that Paul Detterman's been here, you've had a town meeting, that you may have already heard this talk. But what I want to talk to you tonight about is a problem. And the problem is that mainline Christianity is dying in the United States. It's not dying all around the world. Are you aware that there are more than 90 million Presbyterians in the world? 90 million. Just 2 of them here, and the 2 of them here are struggling, the 2 million that are in the U.S., but there are a lot of things going very well in the world, but not in the U.S. 9 to 660,000. That's the most dramatic loss, and the disciples are pretty big in Oklahoma. Phillips University, etc. They're dying at the highest rate. Presbyterians are not far behind. On this chart, we've got 4.2 million that have gone all the way back down to 2 million, and actually the 2011 numbers put us at 1.9. So you're part of a denomination that is part of a family of denominations that are all struggling. So somebody ought to look at this and ask the question, what is in common with those folks that is causing them all to struggle? Now, Protestantism in North America is not declining. It's pretty static. 2001 was the first year in American church history when the number of independent Protestants out, it's just the last 10 years, 2001, we were right at 2.5 million. Think about that, 2.5. In just 10 years, we've lost 20% of our total so that we're now just under 2 million. Now, we have had an amazing streak. We have been losing members every year in the northern Presbyterian part of the body since 1965 and in the southern part of the Presbyterian body since 1969. Do you realize that is more consecutive losing seasons than the Pittsburgh Pirates, and they have the longest record of losing seasons of any team in any professional sport right now, and this year they're about to turn it around. I just saw them in Denver last night. But the Presbyterians are losing. I mean, we're the Chicago Cubs of the religious world. I mean, we just can't seem to get there. Now, we're actually declining at a faster rate among our young adults than overall. I want you to look at these numbers. If you can see them, these are children's baptisms. 1999. Those of you on the first row, how many baptisms did we do in 1999? 41,000. How many baptisms did we do in 2010 of children? Okay, now if the whole group has declined from 2.5 million to 2 million, that's a 20% loss. Is this a 20% loss? Much greater. Now, you've got to also factor into this number. Let's do a little study. Help me with this. How do infants get to church? I know people drive young in Oklahoma, but can they get there on their own? So see, that number actually represents children and parents. The number of parents are not there, but you just lost another probably 80,000 people who were parents who are now not there. 40,000 would be the difference. So we're losing young adults at a faster rate, and that rate has been accelerating because look at the next set of numbers. You see that from 83 to 2010, we went from 50,000 to 22. Of the last 10 years, we've gone from 41,000. So we are really dying quickly. Now, evangelism is the primary and urgent task of the church. That was in the PC USA Book of Order, and we actually were doing it. You know, every church every year got asked, are you starting a new church out of your church? Now, you might have to answer that year, no, we're not. But a lot of years you answered, yes, we are. But you would think a church that really wanted to grow would keep moving people and planting churches in places like Edmond and places that are growing on the outskirts of things. And you've had a church here for more than 100 years, right? It's a long-standing, strong church that somebody had a vision for. And it's grown. But when's the last time Edmond gave birth to a church? Well, in the old days, that was the expectation. And it was by starting new churches that you reached new people, and it was by evangelizing children that were not children of the church. That 1925 year is a significant year because that's the year we decided to stop doing Sunday school for non-churched kids and started doing it for churched kids. We used to have a strong outreach for unchurched. So if you look at the number of churches built, if you look at 2010, front row, how many churches did the PC USA form in 2010? How many did we close? How many years can you do that? Start 12, close 88. If this were any business, do you realize there would be a blue ribbon committee to analyze why are we losing every single year? Because you look at the numbers recently, 89,000 entered, 151,000, next slide, 151,000 left. You can't do that. Any company that has that kind of remarkable loss in customers would be having catastrophe. And we've had lots of catastrophes. I went by my old shopping center today, the one where I grew up, Mayfair, right there at 50th and May, and I just thought, okay, let me see where Otasco is, Oklahoma Tire and Supply Company. Otasco is not there. The bakery that made the best eclairs and chocolate long johns wasn't there. Whitaker's grocery store wasn't there. Some of those have failed. We're about to be Whitaker's grocery store. And so A year and a half ago, a group of us got together, wrote a letter to the church, and we said, I think the PC USA is deathly ill. Now, there's been no more controversial part of that letter than that little phrase. People have written, no, we're not deathly ill. Who has the audacity to say we're deathly ill? I want to know his name. Well, that was actually my little phrase. And I didn't say we were dead. You have to be careful in the definition. I just said we're ill, and we're deathly ill. You know, you can be deathly ill and your left foot is feeling fine. But the system is got troubles, and the system has troubles by what I would call both external problems, next slide, and internal problems. Externally, we have lost the ability to know how to do evangelism in this cultural context. Most of us have kind of grown up in Christendom, and we understand inviting people to church. But we're not in Christendom anymore, and we don't know how to invite people into a relationship with Christ as well as we did in 1925 when we were not in Christendom. And we've got internal problems. All kinds of things within Presbyterianism have gone astray. We've gotten into kind of what you'd call pluralistic theology, where everybody's able to believe what they want to believe. There are not many good boundaries grow in the 90s, but in this last decade, most strong evangelical churches have worked their tails off to stay even with a slight decline. And lots of churches are just in a crisis. I'm not sure about a whole lot of churches' survival. The church I grew up in at 50th and May was a 1,300-member church when our family moved to Arkansas in 1969. It's about a 100-member church now, and they have closed off the educational wing of the church, where when I was a child, there were 35 people my age, normally in the 4th grade and 5th grade Sunday school class with me. Now they've closed the building. They don't even turn the air conditioner on. Why? There are no more children. None. We're deathly ill. We've got a problem. So, what is this thing called the fellowship? What is it? And what is this thing we're calling ECO? Well, let me give you a picture. If you think of the PC USA as this round red ball, the fellowship is a differentiated subset within the whole, meaning it is this bluish circle overlap that says we're in the PC USA, but we're going to start acting in a complete different way. We'll do whatever we have to do to kind of pay our presbytery dues, etc., but we're going to start living a different life. This fellowship said we're also going to start what for a long time we were calling a new reformed body, because to be dismissed from the Presbyterian Church, you have to be dismissed into a reformed body. Last January, we gave a name to that new reformed body, the Covenant Order of Evangelical Presbyterians. So this is an actual denomination that actually exists to this day, and the church that I am a pastor in Colorado Springs, was one of the first 17 churches that have joined together to be inside of that. Most of them were dismissed in a May or June presbytery meeting in Atlanta, and in each of those meetings, those two groups will meet much of the time simultaneously for training, and in sometimes differing settings to be involved in various parts of what we would call a presbytery meeting or a covenanted order meeting. Now, separating from the whole is not an easy step, nor is it a step anyone should consider lightly. It's a heavy thing. But let me tell you what we learned in Presbyterian history all the way back into a time of reunion in 1758. I'm going to read you this thing, which would be too hard for anybody past the third row to read. But very early in the history of the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America, even before the General Assembly was established, there was a plan of reunion between the Synod of New York and the Synod of Philadelphia, which was a split we had between 1741 and 1758. When they rejoined, they wrote this, that when any matter is determined by a major vote or a majority vote, every member shall either actively concur with or passively submit to such a determination, or if his conscience permit him to do neither, he shall, after sufficient liberty, modestly to reason and remonstrate, he may peaceably withdraw from our communion without attempting to make any schism, provided always that this shall be understood to extend only to such determinations as the bodies shall judge indispensable in doctrine or Presbyterian government. Now what that's saying is, and you probably practice this at the level of the session, every now and then the session will decide something that you really don't like. You go, that's not right. Now, when that happens, in the best of Presbyterian form of government, you either actively concur and say, well, I didn't vote for it, but now that we voted for it, I'm all for it. Now, that's hard for an individualistic society to do, but a collective society learns to do that. It's okay, I'm for it. Or you passively submit. You go, well, I didn't like it, but I'm not going to complain out loud. But the third option is that you might peaceably withdraw. Peaceably. Not throwing rocks, not needing to badmouth. You just say, I think it's time for us to go. You try to do it without creating a schism, meaning creating a tear. So this fellowship of Presbyterians, and particularly ECO, are those congregations who said, we just need to go, and we need to go without creating rancor. So believe it or not, ECO does not spend $1 on advertising. We just go word of mouth. When somebody says, I think we'd like to talk, we go talk. We don't try to get involved in any church that's not even thinking about this. We're not trying to stir up dissent. But for churches who need to peaceably withdraw, we want to come and at least explain what you might be considering withdrawing to. It does say you can have a little bit of modestly to reason and remonstrate, and in Oklahoman we call that to fuss a little bit. That's what remonstrate means. But ultimately that you just say, I think it's time for us to go. We've got a lot of people in the Presbyterian world right now who are mad. They're just mad as a hornet. Mad does not create a great church. Throwing rocks at the denomination does not help anybody. We have gotten a chance over the last 10 years to watch Southern Baptists split apart, Episcopalians to split apart, Lutherans to split apart. There's got to be a better way to do it than to what used to be called anathematize the other, that they're going to hell. I don't think that's the case. I think sometimes you just need to say, need to do different. So let's review those three terms. You could actively concur, you could passively submit, or peaceably withdraw. Now, to peaceably withdraw to the Fellowship of Presbyterians and or to ECO, you need to understand what we're calling the three-legged stool of the Fellowship of Presbyterians and ECO. There are three critical concerns that are different. And you can see those three circles: theology, missional, and covenanted order. Let's start with theology, the next slide. Now, we actually believe that over time, the Presbyterian world has been fracturing in our understanding of our theology. And we feel like to do the mission God is calling us to in this world, we need, next slide, a like-minded theological consensus. Now, like-minded is the second most criticized word of those folks who are in this fellowship and ECO movement. People are saying, who would want to be like-minded? We'll do a word study of that in Paul's writings in the New Testament, and you're going to find like-minded is in virtually every one of his letters as a positive value. But if you think theological pluralism is the value and that everybody ought to be able to believe what they want to believe, then like-minded sounds stifling. We didn't say same-minded. Everybody doesn't have to walk in lockstep. But we believe we will only accomplish what we're called to accomplish if we have a theology in common. And there are some great divergence, as most of you know, in what Presbyterians believe. I'll give you the worst example I can illustrate. I was at a meeting in Louisville about 10 years ago where 20 of us were present, all of whom had not only a Master's of Divinity, but some kind of advanced degree, and we were all pastors. And they had us there studying the resurrection of the body. As we began to talk about Easter and Good Friday and all the issues around resurrection, it was stunning to me that of the 20 who were there, only 3 of us believed that Jesus bodily rose from the dead on Easter morning. 3 out of 20. Well, now that tells me something about what's sick in this church. Now, why would somebody not believe on Easter that Jesus rose from the dead? Well, if you believed in an Enlightenment worldview that would be a cause and effect, a very kind of experimental, you ought to be able to reproduce this in the test tube to believe it, then you would go, well, resurrections can't occur. And one of the great New Testament scholars, Rudolf Bultmann, said that no one who shaves with an electric razor would be able to believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead. Now, Bultmann coined a phrase that was called demythologizing the New Testament. We got to take the myths out and let the scientific worldview remain, the empirical kind of study, and resurrections don't happen. So what did happen? Well, the best that can be said is that, well, really, hope rose from the dead. And that hope filled the disciples, and they started a great movement because they had hope that hope would rise again, kind of an existentialism. Well, that's an interesting idea. It's just not what the New Testament presents. Paul says, if you don't believe Jesus actually rose from the dead, you are most to be pitied among men. Now, take a great biblical scholar like William Barclay, who wrote very popular commentaries. Barclay was infected with this Enlightenment worldview. So in those wonderful commentaries, which I consult most of the time, when it comes to the feeding of the 5,000, he said, we know that matter cannot be created from nothing. So Jesus did not create more bread and more fish because it can't happen. So what did happen? A little boy brought forth his lunch. It inspired other people to say, well, okay, I guess I'll share my lunch too. And it became the first potluck supper. That's what Barclay would say. And in so saying, he says that's actually a miracle of sharing that might be a greater miracle than the miracle of multiplication of fish and loaves. Well, it is a great miracle when people share. But that's not how any of the 4 Gospels present that. And that's one of the only miracles outside of the resurrection that is in all 4 Gospels. None of them are calling it a potluck supper. They were seeing something so remarkably done that they wanted to drag Jesus away and make him king because they could have bread every day. So do you see how this has infected the New Testament worldview that has caused us to no longer have a theological consensus? If you're going to be in ECO, if you're going to be in the Fellowship of Presbyterians, session by session, pastor by pastor, we would ask those people to affirm that they sincerely receive and adopt the essential tenets of the Reformed faith. We have listed those in a new document, which is available to all of you. Because since 1925, Presbyterians have said, you know, we want to keep the question, how many of you are elders and deacons in this room? Let me just see. So all of you were ordained, and we asked you the question, do you sincerely receive and adopt the essential tenets of the Reformed faith? And all of you said? Yes. But what are they? Well, they're not listed anywhere. So you just said, I guess, oh, yeah, right. But there was no content to what you answered in the question. Now, you are faithful people. You know essentially what those are, but a whole lot of people have been able to answer that question with no content because in 1925, we decided let's not define them because it upsets people when we define them. So since 1925, there's been no content to that question. We think that cannot continue. And so now when sessions are asking to be in ECO, we have a little interviewing team that interviews the whole session and the pastors. Do you really believe this? Because we think that's the only way we can move forward. Secondly, we are reformed in our theology. That means right now we have expressed what has been expressed in the Reformation, the sola scriptura, the sola gratia, the sola fide, the sola Christus, and we are also evangelical in our understanding of theology. Those are not easy things to always put together. We believe there are real limits to pluralism. and letting everybody believe what they want to believe, which is the next slide. And there was a statement in a book I read 20 years ago that was this: indeed, the very plurality that promised remarkable depth and breadth of vision in the Presbyterian thought and worship threatens to become a network of fault lines for future division. That's where we are today. So one of the three-legged stools is a very serious approach to theology, and at every meeting when we get together, we will actually be doing this. How many Presbyterian meetings have you been to when you really never studied anything biblical or theological? Every time we'll do that. The second big area is missional. And missional is this issue that has to do with helping the church begin to identify itself as a mission station in a lost culture, rather than identifying itself as a church franchise in a Christendom culture. Let me give you some alarming numbers. Of the builder generation born prior to 1946, in North America, 75% of those people regard themselves as part of a faith tradition. Let's just see, how many in this room were born prior to 1946? Those hands. 75% of your generation considers themselves part of a faith tradition. That's why most people of that generation don't know that many people who are not part of a faith tradition, because most believe it. But when you get to my generation, which are called baby boomers, born between 46 and 64, only 50% of us regard ourselves as part of a faith tradition. So where are the baby boomers in the room? All those good-looking people. That's it. That's what I thought. Now, again, our generation took a vacation from God in the 60s and the 70s. And most of our parents thought once we sow our wild oats, which were a little wilder than their oats, we would come back with our children to have them baptized. And 50% of us did. But what has been remarkable is that half of them have not. And so if you ask most people in a builder generation in a church, if they've got 2 children, how many of them are church today? And they'll say, well, 1, maybe none. They have 4 children, maybe 2. And do they go to a Presbyterian type church? Not always. Now, when you get to the next generation, born after 1964, we call them Gen X, because they were the 10th generation in American church history. 27% of that generation considers themselves to be church. Now, they're of the age. They've had their vacation from God. They ought to be coming back, bringing a couple of kids. And they're not coming back, and they have not brought their children, and they have gone to other kinds of churches when they have come back. It's too early, really, to assess the millennials. Those are the ones born in the mid-'80s until now. Some of them are still very young adults. Some of them are in college. Some of them are in high school. But the numbers are not looking good for that generation, that it may be about half of Gen X. The harvest is plentiful, he says, but the workers are few. Studies done on Presbyterians say this, that we tend to share our faith with an unbelieving person once every 15 years. Only the Episcopalians are worse than us at that. Now, again, we invite people to church, but we usually don't want to tell them why Jesus is important to us. We've done well at nominal Christians, helping them come into an alive relationship with Christ. That's what Cursillo, pilgrimage, those kind of things have done, retreats. But taking somebody that really doesn't know much about it and inviting them in, when they come in, it's kind of like this alien thing. Most of my life, because I'm a baby boomer, I have not joined service organizations. That's just not what baby boomers did. But in Colorado Springs, I was persuaded to join the Rotary Club, which is one of the outstanding service organizations. So I joined the Downtown Club in Colorado Springs, and I'd go to lunch every Friday, and there'd be a program. And, you know, as you got in, some people got better orientations than others, and I didn't get too good a one, and so I was kind of in, and it was amazing. We'd just all be chit-chatting over lunch, and then suddenly someone would go ring a bell. Boom, 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 boom. And everybody that was eating lunch would rise to attention. And the song leader would be up front, and everybody would put their hand on their heart and would say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Now, I had not said the Pledge of Allegiance since 6th grade at Mayfair Elementary. It was wonderful. I still remembered it. I pledge allegiance to the flag. But it's just not something that is done anywhere else in culture now. And then we sang a rousing song that was kind of a 60s folk tune. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Islands. I hadn't sung that in years. And then we went through a couple other kind of ritualistic, liturgical things. And then we sat down and finished our lunch and heard somebody get up and give a kind of innocuous speech. We call that a sermon in a Presbyterian church about something. And then we all waddled home together, you know. And it was like, wow, this would be what the Presbyterian church would be like if you hadn't grown up in the Presbyterian church. You go, what is that strange instrument they're playing? It's kind of loud. Seems to come out of some pipes or something. And what did they just get up and sing? I've never heard that song. And so you see, to become missional, we've got to begin to have a passion, next slide, a passion for how to reach lost people. Not found people, but lost people. And most of our churches are not there, but it begins with the heart. And it begins as we're willing to make what some people in leadership literature now are calling adaptive changes. Adaptive changes is when you've got really two competing values at work. And you have to begin to change some of the ways you do things to begin to attract those who, in fact, are not here. Leslie Newbegin writes about mission in his understanding of mission. He was from India, a missionary to India, and he says, many churches err on staying so close to the sending culture that the receiving culture can't quite hear
the Scottish
the gospel.
To us, because they felt like every Kenyan church needed a pump organ. We were told that to worship the Lord, you needed to worship with your hands folded in your lap, being very still, that drums were an instrument of the devil, and that movement in worship was an instrument of the devil. So we learned to sit very still, we learned to pour tea, we learned to sing with a pump organ, and the church sort of incrementally grew, mostly because education was the carrot out here. And then we had the Cultural Revolution, and we asked the missionaries to go home, and everybody looked around and said, are drums really an instrument of the devil? I don't think so. What about movement? I don't think so. What do we do with the pump organs? Well, one day, we might need them. So let's put them in this warehouse, and they had big plastic over them, because one day it just might come upon us. But you see, they began to understand how to reach people from their own culture. And now if you go to a Presbyterian Church of East Africa, which is 3 times the size of the Presbyterian Church in the United States. If you go now and it's time to give the offering, they do not pass plates to give the offering. You know, you come forward to give the offering with music going, and you dance all the way. And it might be money, and it might be a chicken, and it might be but it is maybe the most joyous thing, and thus, that's an interesting way to get offering, because if everybody's coming to the front, and usually the elders stand right over the offering plate, and so, there's just, you might try it, Mateen. I mean, it has options. Now, the adaptive changes we're needing to make in America are moving from an attractional church to a missional church, because what we have been for the last at least 70 years is a church that has been trying to make itself as attractive to the unreached group as we can, so that they'll come here, see it, and go, I got to have some of that. But what it creates is a culture of consumers in the church, who, when another church becomes more attractive, they will go there. Or when something goes wrong here, they're not in, because every week you got to put on a show and keep them. A missional church is a different thing. That's a competing value. It moves in another competing value from an internal focus, how are we all doing, to an external focus, how are they doing? My mother was driven with trying to figure out, why are people not here? Who's not here and why? And she's put that little instinct in me, who's not here and why? It moves from what I would call come hither, where we would polish the doors of the church and make it look real, to go forth. It really hit in our church with the competing value of reverence and hospitality. We had to spend 4 months at session meeting discussing a problem we were having in Colorado Springs, and the problem was referred to as smugglers. Smugglers. Can you imagine in a Presbyterian church, smugglers? Because our latest service at 11:10 is a contemporary service. And at that service, those young adults are smuggling coffee from Starbucks, which is 1 block away, isn't it, Latine? They're smuggling coffee into the sanctuary. Now, in our sanctuary, we have tile floor. We have carpet down the middle, but so if coffee is spilled, it's just being spilled on tile. It's not a carpet issue. But you shouldn't have coffee in a sanctuary, right? Where is it written in the book? Well, actually, it's not written in the book, but it should be written in the book. It's right there with neither a borrower nor a lender be. I think it's right in there with that one, which is actually Shakespeare, not the Bible. But we tend to get these things in our mind because, in the next slide, the conflict is between reverence versus hospitality. But you see, young adults think that to listen to Singleton preach, I'm going to need a cup of coffee. They get that. And their cup of coffee wasn't church coffee that really cost $0.25. It was Starbucks coffee that cost $4. And so if they walked in with it and somebody said, you got to put it down, they're going to go wherever they need to go to drink the coffee. But they like to sip it in worship. Wasn't hurting anything on the floor, but it just felt wrong because our elders then said, well, if we don't stop this right now and nip it in the bud, mothers are going to be smuggling goldfish in for their little children to eat. And somebody said, those crumbs are all over the floor. We've already got those smugglers in. What? And then I'll never forget, an elder said, if we don't stop this, they're going to be driving by with Borriello's Pizza going, who ordered the pepperoni? And then they'll be bringing right into 11 o'clock worship. Well, probably not. But, you know, a session had to discuss this for 4 months. What are we going to do to reach the next generation? Is coffee like drums and like movement in worship? So you know what we finally did? This is one of those great Presbyterian things. We agreed to compromise. We created a don't ask, don't tell policy. Meaning, the ushers agreed that at 11:10, when they brought their coffee cup, we would just kind of look at it. We couldn't put it in the bulletin that coffee is now welcome in the church. That would create all kinds of controversy. So don't ask, don't tell. Now, do you see what I mean by adaptive change? Churches come up with things that scare unbelievers off, and they didn't even mean to do it. My second Sunday in Colorado Springs, a college student from Colorado College was there and persuaded her boyfriend, whom she had been trying to get to church all year, to come. When he finally came into the narthex, he was wearing a baseball cap. Have you ever seen young adults wear baseball caps in all kinds of strange places? He didn't have the natural sense to know, I'm the only one here wearing a baseball cap. Maybe I ought to take my cap off. So he started to come in, and an usher told him, as he had been instructed, that you can either come in the sanctuary without your hat on, or you can keep your hat on and worship out in the narthex, or go home. Now, the girl had been trying to get him to church for 9 months. He finally came, and because of the baseball cap, he turned around and left. Is that worth it in the values of the kingdom of God? In fishing language, you don't get to clean the fish until you've caught the fish. Think about that. Think about that. And if you never catch the fish, see, we're trying to clean that fish on the front end before we caught it. Is the church a place where an unbeliever can actually come and ask stupid questions? and dress in ways that don't fit everybody? Or do we give off this signal that this is for church folks? And if you're not one of us, well, that's an adaptive change. But again, you got to go back. What's the problem? Are we just trying to get away from the PC USA, or are we trying to create a different kind of movement? Now, that's just an illustration. The third big area that ECO and the fellowship are about is what we call covenanted order. Now, covenanted order is actually a phrase we're borrowing from the Roman Catholic Church. When the Roman Catholic Church found dissent within it, has had an amazing track record of creating a new order to let that other group begin to act in a new way. When the Jesuits got very interested in education and mission, the Society of Jesus was formed, and they were underneath the big umbrella, but they lived in a different way. When the Franciscans began to want to reach out to the poor and began to act in a different way and live in a certain life together, they created a new order. What ECO really is a new order within the larger Presbyterian family. And as such, it means it has a common theology, a common mission, and it's going to have a covenanted life together. The presbyteries in ECO are going to be small, between 10 and 20 churches, so you actually know each other. Every church is going to agree to be in a mission affinity group where you would be with 3 other congregations who are going to hold you accountable to the very stuff we're talking about. Who are going to say, hey, you didn't have any professions of faith, you didn't baptize any babies this year, help me understand why. What can we do to help you get to where you need to be? Is it going to be a little more intrusive than we have been up to now? Yeah, you can pretty much just do your own little thing. Or not. And you really only get in trouble in the Presbyterian world if you steal money or do something sexually or get power crazy. But if you're just ineffective, we just tolerate you forever. But this is saying, we think together with a covenant, and that sessions would meet together. When is the last time a session met with a whole session from 3 other congregations to begin to probe why are we not, or what can we celebrate that we are doing? So we have a plan on how to do that. That means that instead of a regulatory agency, you're now going to be in a relational order where there will be accountability, where there will be mentoring going on. So you're going to have this passion for the lost, this like-minded theology, this company of pastors and elders, sharing best practices, and then the values of the fellowship mean that you're going to work toward creating church planting opportunities, intentional missional outreach, celebrating the gifts of men and women in ministry, and much greater flexibility in the calling of pastors into ministry. To become a missional church, we've got to change some of the ways we've been doing things. Hence, 2 things are now born. The Fellowship of Presbyterians, for those staying within the PC USA, are going to live by those same values in the midst of something. And this new denomination that's going to exist on the outside. I would say that First Pres Edmond has had a catalytic relationship with many of us who have lived in the evangelical world in the PC USA for a long time. When I was in Austin, Texas, going to Cursillo's, where did this come from? Well, it came from a bunch of folks from Edmond, Oklahoma, who were willing to go a long way to help start something. When I got to Colorado Springs and we were doing Cursillo and pilgrimage, where'd this come from? Well, this church in Edmond. Whole bus of them came up here for the first one and got us launched. You have been a mother church for most of these values I'm trying to describe now, for many of us. And I just have the sense that wherever First Pres Edmond is, I want to be on the same team. Now, you're going to have to discern, do we need to leave? It sounds like that's getting more clear. And where to go. ECO is a brand new thing. And to get in a brand new thing, you have to have a certain kind of entrepreneurial spirit. The EPC is an established thing. It's not been that established. It's 30 years, but it's established. We're going to have to do some building in this one. I've spent a lot of my last year doing these kinds of things. I preach nearly every Sunday at home. That's the only time they really know I'm there anyway, right? So I've been doing that and then doing a bunch of this. I think ECO is for people who are trying to solve a certain problem. If all you want to do is get away from the PC USA, your easiest choice, I think, is to go EPC. If that will solve your problems, that would be probably right. But here's a baseball analogy, and I'm a baseball player. And I love a church that is across the street from a baseball field. That just thrills me. Anyway, no extra charge for that. If you are a .228 hitter and you play for the Texas Rangers, and you get traded to the Houston Astros, it is quite likely you're still going to be a .228 hitter. Changing uniforms does not change how you play. ECO is about a different kind of coaching, a different kind of mentoring, a different kind of goal and aim. So if the problem you want to fix is the plateauing nature of evangelical Presbyterian churches, and if you want First Pres Edmond to have a chance at reaching the Millennials and the Gen Xers in 2025, then you might want to think about something that's trying to be a rather different organization. We don't think we can do it alone. We think we've got to have a different way of relating to each other to get the job done. So I'm going to stop there, because then I would get into, I'm almost getting into selling now, aren't I? So I'm going to stop right there and just let you ask questions you would love to ask or make comments, and I'm going to ask Mateen to be Vanna White and kind of run around with the mic. He looks like Vanna White. Or rebuttals, or remonstrance.
You said you're going to have a new way of bringing folks into the ministry?
Yes.
What is that?
Three different things are going to be remarkably new. One of those is that we have brought back the role of what's called the assistant pastor. An associate pastor is called by a congregation, an assistant pastor is called by a session. The timeline of that is much quicker. Secondly, to begin to have these missional worshiping congregations, we believe we're going to need younger people ready to be equipped into ministry in a quicker fashion. Through a 3-year Master of Divinity is what is required now to be a Presbyterian pastor. ECO will ordain somebody into all the pastoral roles if they've got a 1-year MA in a related field, if they work under someone like Mateen, who does have an MDiv, and would be related to this church. And they may want to continue on in their education, but we actually believe that they need to be in the practice of ministry to best learn. So that's quicker. And then thirdly, the certified lay pastor has been a role that has been used with particularly elders. That's going to be expanded to deacons, so that 3 different ways of getting people into ministry in a quicker fashion that will still be high standards of education, but working on that while you're doing the tasks of ministry. We think that will allow us to start missional communities that may meet in this sanctuary and they may meet in a coffee shop. We built a whole coffee shop at First Pres Colorado Springs just because we see that as one of those venues where people will interact with us that won't come in the door yet. So that'd be 3 different.
I wanted to see if you'd throw me out of the church.
Oh, he's got a baseball hat. I get it. I get it.
Same question.
Because of the information we find out along with the journey right now, some of the pastors in PC USA have decided. Can you not hear me now? They've decided that maybe Jesus Christ is the only way into heaven.
Correct.
By their own.
Correct.
What do you call it? Survey.
Yep.
By their own survey.
Yep.
Which means they may have lost their way somewhere.
Yep.
And in a new denomination, is there some way to keep check on the people we are going to ordain to make sure they don't lose their way, and if they do, help them?
See, there are advantages to hats. And they're looking at you very askance back there, I know. The covenanted order is the real way. Right now, the only mechanism we have is self-identification from a kind of, I no longer believe this, do you think I ought to stay ordained? Nobody does that now. Because the pluralism allows them to believe pretty much anything they want. We've got genuine Unitarians who are in the Presbyterian Church who don't believe Jesus is the unique Savior and don't believe He's the only way. They just believe He's a great moral teacher. Now, they've been allowed to stay because really we've never had, since 1925, the teeth to take somebody like that and move them aside. Here's an illustration. In 1941, a man in the Southern Presbyterian Church was tried for heresy. And in 1961, he was elected moderator of the denomination. That just shows you how much the denomination has changed. The covenanted order would mean that not only are you in a small presbytery who will know you much better, and not only are you meeting in this missional affinity group once a year with other churches who will be able to flesh that out, but every pastor has to be in a covenant group with a group of pastors who will be constantly working on each other's soul. We have not been in that except in a voluntary fashion now, and most pastors are not. Do you know this? Most pastors in the Presbyterian Church right now, self-survey, never read the Bible except for what they are preparing to preach on Sunday. They have no devotional reading of the Bible. That will be different. Now, can you guarantee that a heresy won't sneak in? I'm a church historian. No, you can't. Heresies have snuck in all through church history in a variety of means, and here's a little aside. I've been talking a little bit about women. Do you know that 95% of all heresies have come from men, not from women? So just factor that one in as well. We've been the sponsors of heresy, but it could come. But I think we've got a system set up that would much better find it. Okay, maybe one or two more, and the team gets to say when to stop.
Will we be required to send any money upstream to PC USA? To the PC USA or to...
The question would be, would we be required to send any money upstream to the PC USA? And if you join ECO, you will not. If you stay in the fellowship, you would still have to pay your per capitas. This one would be a complete separate account. Now, there are areas of the PC USA that would still be willing to work with ECO churches. For instance, our church has one missionary through the PC USA who is working in Lithuania. We're going to still support her, and we're going to write the check to the PC USA for her designated missionary support. But other than that, no, these finances, pension plan, insurance plan, it's all a different thing. We have created a denomination in about 6 months out of nothing, and it is a separate entity.
All right, we'll take one last question, and then we'll close. And please feel free to stay and enjoy some more refreshments, and we'll hang around for a while to answer some questions. Last question.
I think we are ECO. I think this church is ECO. That's just my opinion, but I think that that's what we need to be, and I think that's what we are.
Well,
Amen.
thank you for
You would know that better than me.
Well, certainly the things that Jim has outlined are values that we hold dear, and things that we have been talking about for the last number of years in terms of being missionally focused, having an external focus into the community, and one of the great benefits in my mind is this covenanted order, that we would be joining like-minded congregations and leaders, and that we would be sharing best practices, we would be learning from the successes of others who are in similar situations to our own, and we would be spurred on in a very positive way to do better what we're trying to do even now. My own analogy is that joining the EPC would be a lot like slipping on a very comfortable slipper at the end of the day and relaxing in front of the TV. Joining ECO would be more like putting on the running shoe and knowing that you've got to get out and move, that there's something that you're called to do. So it depends on what kind of a church we want to be as we look into the future. We're so grateful, Jim, that you came. What a wonderful presentation, very helpful. If you have other questions, and Jim will be around, I think, for a little bit, and would be glad to talk with you. Otherwise, write out your questions or remember your questions and ask them of any elder or any of the pastors, and we'll try to get you the answer that you want to that question. Gordon, I see a hand. You just can't resist. Sure.
Thank you. I don't like to talk with my back to everyone. Thank you for being here. I've been thinking over the last few weeks about what's going on here and thinking about what responsibility each of us has. If we're like most of the world, change is not something we like to do. Change is always difficult. But this is probably one of the most important things you'll ever have to do in your life related to your relationship with the Lord. We have to make a decision, and each one of us needs to pray heavily that God will guide us into making a decision. We can't turn our back on the responsibility of decision making. So I pray that each of you and everyone you talk to in our congregation, you will encourage to pray about this, think about it, and make your decision about where we're going and what we're going to do. One of the things I heard tonight was about adaptive change. Adaptive change. We have to change. And we have to change in a way that change will be adaptive to what we want the mission of First Presbyterian Church to be. And I pray that each of you will give that great, great thought and prayer. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon. Well, once again, thank you all for coming tonight. Go into the world with the peace of Christ to love and serve the Lord. Amen. Have a good evening.